Rejoice, everyone, we're back with another Sekhie Reacts to Fate. This week is Lakshmibai, which is not the name on the Wikipedia page, because this is her technical, like, the name that she's probably better known by.
Lakshmibai.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rani of Jhansi is her title.
Yeah.
It just means Queen of Jhansi. Because Rani is the word that it's the equivalent of queen in English, essentially. And then I've been assured that we are also going to be talking about Lakshmi and Alakshmi at least a little. I don't know if it's going to be a whole ton.
Not a whole ton, but especially Alakshmi. And to do Alakshmi, you kind of have to do Lakshmi.
Well, I mean, you could just say Alakshmi is the exact opposite of Lakshmi. And then just presume that people know what Lakshmi is.
You don't presume stuff like that. I know how your brain works. I just talked to you about continued education and got like 30 minutes of a rant on something in there that was not what you were talking about for a second.
Look, to understand the end product, you need to go back to the beginning. 20,000 years ago, when humans first evolved. You know, I saw a Tumblr joke about that one time, and I have never let that stop me from doing that with every bit of writing that I've ever done. I think it's great. Everyone, write like you need to explain the history of humanity to get to the present day issue that you're talking about. It makes it so much more amusing for me. I don't know if it makes it better for you guys, but it makes it better for me. So I think this is the first time we've had a Indian fate servant who's so
historical,
new. Not in terms of like creation in the game, but like 1850s, man.
We haven't even had an Indian historical figure before.
Yeah, that's technically true.
We've had largely Indian
mythological, like Hindu characters, yeah. So, I mean, congrats. It's our first historical person in Indian history. And it's a very recent one. We're talking about the Indian Rebellion of 1857. And Indian nationalism. Heavily Indian nationalism. Which is actually a pretty cool topic, because this is sort of the breaking free of imperial colonial boundaries and rebellions.
Fuck the East India Trading Company.
Yes, in specific. Fuck the British East India Trading Company. Not to say that you shouldn't have the exact same sentiments about, say, the Dutch East Indies Trading Company or any other, Indian trading company, but fuck the British one in specific in this case. Because what the British did to attempt to seize control over large swaths of India and put down rebellions was nothing short of sheer and utter brutality on a scale which was pretty impressive and horrific. I mean, just the implementation of the doctrine of lapse was absolute bullshit in the history of British India, right? Do you know what the doctrine of lapse is?
No. So
it is relevant to Lakshmibai, but so you know that Lakshmibai, after she was made queen, she was married to a man much older than her originally, and they died without her having produced a surviving blood heir.
Oh, I know what this is now.
Yeah, so the doctrine of lapse was put in place by the British governor of India at the time, or something, Deluisman or something. His name Dalhousie, Lord Dalhousie. I don't know how to pronounce his name. To bring back not remembering how to pronounce British people's names. They didn't pronounce your names right, so you don't pronounce their names right. But he basically said, hey, if there's no blood heir, I don't care if there's a cultural tradition or history of adoption to fill these spots. If there is not a blood heir, I determine as a British man that you will cede all of your lands to British control. And she had been made stepmother of the boy that her husband adopted, right? And in his dying wish was for his wife to reign as the, what's the word for that? There's a word for it.
Regent?
Yes, thank you. cannot believe I forgot that word. His wife was supposed to reign as the regent until his adopted heir was old enough to take over. This was a pretty this is a historical practice that had a fairly long history in India, right? Like, so this is not something that is new, not something that he created. And the British said no. And then Queen went to war. I feel like that's a very simplistic version of her story. We're gonna get into it right about now. But yeah, she went to war. So you say she's historical, but she's only historical from the point of her marriage. We actually know virtually nothing about her birth or her early childhood years. We have a vague guess at when she might have been born, based on her age at marriage and what year she was betrothed, but that's really about it. So we think that she was probably born around the period between 1825 and 1835. So British sources tend towards the older age, and Indian sources tend towards the younger age, right? So astrologers say that when she was born, she would present the qualities of Lakshmi, Durga, and Saraswati, right? Lakshmi, the deity of wealth; Durga, strength; Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge, right? So she was going to be born as this beautiful woman who was wise and strong and powerful, and that was one of the reasons why she was a very attractive prospect for marriage. Her mother and father had eyes on getting her into a position of power, moving her up the social ladder somewhat. Keep in mind, India has a caste system, so moving up the social ladder is kind of a misnomer. She's still moving within her caste. Whether or not she is from sort of, like, whether or not the hierarchy inside that caste is complex. This is not a rags to riches story of someone from, like, the lowest class of Hindu society coming up and becoming a queen. This is not what is happening. And that's important because when you consider the history of her life, not only has she become a symbol of Indian nationalism and Indian nationalism movements, but she's also been co-opted as sort of both a symbol of the oppressiveness of the caste system, right, by certain groups in India today, where, you know, it's kind of, they'll create figures who stood beside her who were from lower classes, saying that, this, like, untouchable man was her greatest advisor. Look at how she kind of allowed him to have this position of power. And that has been seen as both a negative and a positive. So we do want to keep in mind, this is not a rags to riches story. There is still a caste system. This is still a person of high status, even if she's not as high status as the family that she married into. So she marries Gangadhar Rao, who was the oldest, who was the Raja of Jhansi, right? So Jhansi, the region that she reigns over. According to Indian sources, we'll go with those for now, they were married in 1842, but she was only 7 years old at the time. Consummation would have to wait until she was 14, right? Indian sources say that she's much younger than British sources do, which, knowing history around the world, it's highly likely that the British sources were changed to sort of reflect a different set of morals and values when it came to age at which a girl could get married. Because, in the 1850s in Britain, it was becoming less and less common for girls to get married that young. So I would maybe trust the Indian sources on this just a little bit better, knowing about the way that sort of history is recorded. And also knowing that the British went into India and put into place a lot of policies that went directly against old standing traditions that the Hindu people had held for centuries. And that these traditions that were banned were parts of the reasons for these multiple rebellions towards the end, towards the 1850s, right? Because there was also the British ruled that it would be illegal in India to perform a specific type of bride sacrifice upon the death of the groom. And the thing is, it was not a very common practice, but the British kind of found this weird out there practice, even for Hindus, and they were like, oh my God, look how barbaric it is, we're going to ban it. And then Hindus basically said, well, that's our culture and tradition. That's strike one. I don't care if it's not that common. That's our tradition to be able to do that. And you're taking away our culture and traditions, which is an important note to make. So, Gangadhar was not really interested in the day-to-day running and politics of Jhansi, and he also didn't really care that much to police what his wife did, right? So he didn't care that Lakshmibai decided to train an armed all-female regiment of warriors. According to sources, it's highly likely that this regiment was formed after his death, but some sources say that he just did not care what she was doing because it didn't matter to him, right? But, he did write a message to the East India Company saying that my wife should be regent and that my adopted son, Damodar Rao, should become the new king after I die. Well, that didn't happen. So Governor General Lord Dalhousie employed the doctrine of lapse. And even though, so Lakshmibai rejected this, right? She wrote multiple letters to men who were sympathetic to her position, to other men who had high positions in the company. She wrote directly to the leadership of the East India Company to protest against the annexation in 1854. And Dalhousie would respond to her 11 days after she wrote to them by saying that her husband had ruled with mismanagement, and that Lakshmibai and her adopted son and everyone in their province of Jhansi would benefit from direct British rule because the British had conquered the Marathas, which were the former overlords of the territory, and therefore the company now had a more paramount power than the people of the region, and they now had the authority to determine secession of this Indian royal family and province. And credit where credit is due. Lakshmibai did try to fight this through official legal channels. She reached out to everyone that she could. She talked to members of the military. She talked to members of the company. She wrote multiple appeals to the Governor General. She outlined previous treaties. Keep in mind, this was a very well-educated woman. She knew how to read, she knew how to write. She was educated in the treaties between India and Britain. She had been brought up to be a queen, right? And the company just rejected her again and again and again. And in 1854, they imposed the doctrine of lapse. So a couple of years have passed now. Your land is ours. So they gave her a lifetime pension, right, for... well, they didn't give her a pension. They gave her a house. They said, you have to leave the palace and you can't exert control over this territory, but we'll let you keep this one little house, right? And you don't get to have any say on taxation, and we're going to lift the ban of killing cattle in the province. And anyone who knows anything about Hindu culture will know that that is not something that you want to be doing if you want your subjects to remain happy and pleased with you and on your side. That's a bad idea. Poems about this moment will often say that Lakshmibai had this mantra where she would say, I will never give up my Jhansi. And then she would just continue to train her all-female regiment, and they would parade through the town on horseback with their weapons, sort of as a show of growing power, right? Now, a couple of years later, right? So 3 years later, in 1857, we had the Sepoy rebellion in Meerut, right? And so do you know who the Sepoys were?
Not in any detail.
Okay. We don't need to know them in any detail, but the Sepoys were Indian troops, whether they be Sikh or Hindu or any other denomination, who were recruited by the British to serve as British troops.
Yeah.
And one of the major complaints that the Sepoys had was there had been a rumor at one point that... So the way that old guns worked was you often had to lick the cartridges and then put them into the gun to lubricate them. But a rumor had gone around that the cartridges were being made with cow fat instead of pig fat. Which is part of the reason behind the multiple Sepoy uprisings, because it was a disregard of their faith and principles in order to just produce something, and kind of the inability to tell them that it was happening. So, the rumors went round, people got madder and madder. There was the lifting of the cattle slaughter ban, the banning of that other practice that people didn't care about until it was taken away from them. And it all just led up to some very, very unhappy people. Now, this Indian rebellion raged across most of northern India, crossing Delhi, and there was massacres of British troops at Kanpur and Lucknow. Most of these news didn't reach Jhansi very quickly. So it took a while for them to get there. But Jhansi had a pretty interesting strategic position in that it was kind of over crossroads that went north to Agra and Delhi, northeast to Kanpur and Lucknow, east to Allahabad, and south across the Deccan Plateau. So it was a very central location, but not very quick to receive news, right? So the British garrison was originally not that concerned about these rebellions, and so he allowed the Rani to raise a bodyguard for her own protection, right? Rather than arming his own troops necessarily. But then a group of sepoy infantry took control of the ammunition store at this outpost, shot their commanding officer, and then they essentially held siege on the remaining British troops and their families inside the fort. At the time, Rani sent a letter that claimed that there was some weird shit going on, whereas the British and the sepoys were both trying to blame each other to her. And so the British asked for safe passage, and eventually they were led out to the Jokhan Bagh garden, where they were then massacred. So nothing good went down here, but it was sort of the start of this nascent rebellion. Then Lakshmibai kind of didn't get out scot-free. So there's no evidence that she engineered or orchestrated this massacre of the British troops in Jhansi, but a lot of people blamed her for it because she had been showing force and discontent with the fact that the British had taken control of her lands, right? So it put her in this position where even if she wasn't participating, people thought she was participating and engineering it, and so it didn't matter anymore whether or not she had, because public opinion turned towards that she had. Contemporary reports of some British tax collectors said that they saw her execute people in the garden. Highly unlikely. But, fear-mongering. What are you going to do? Let's see. Eventually, luckily, Major Erskine, right, who had been the commissioner of a nearby division, managed to sort of smooth it over between her and the East India Company, right? And so he gave her the authority to rule until the British returned, in the capacity where she could collect taxes, repair the fort, distribute donations to the poor, and she would hold these powers until the British could return with another garrison and another commander. Maybe not the best idea to give that, I'm not on the British's side here, but
from a strategic standpoint,
it's a bad
dumb
idea
to give the person putting shows of strength and discontent.
Yeah.
Even if she wasn't responsible for the Sepoy Rebellion. Not a good move.
Yeah, no, not a good move. However, this did give her access to a larger amount of troops. She went on a recruiting spree and a manufacturing weapons spree, ended up with about 15,000 troops in the army that she was able to control now. And she attacked in return, right, retaliated against an attack from another kingdom nearby, which had remained loyal to the company, which obviously was not a point in the company's favor when looking at her track record, right? Because, she defended the territory, but she defended the territory against British loyalists. Not a great look. So, at this point, Rani requested forces sent from Major Erskine, the man who had originally put her in charge. And he responded that he would not send any more forces to her, and that all of her actions as Rani of Jhansi would now need to be investigated. She didn't necessarily want to take the side of the rebels, but she did feel that the British were starting to regard her as an enemy based on their failure to reply and their unwillingness to help her actively. So she did refuse to kind of commit herself fully to the act of rebellion that was going on at the time, partially because some of her advisors were advocating for peace with the British while others advocated for war. Keep in mind, we know her now as this sort of warrior queen, right? Like, that's what her reputation has become. But she spent a lot of time trying to solve things diplomatically, which I think is a very good and well thought out decision, right? It's, all things considered, it's not as if she was particularly in a position of power here. And fighting didn't really do her good in the end. So by July of that same year, the British had likely at this point decided that Rani was now an enemy. Even though she had not actively aligned with the rebellion, she'd conflicted with the state that was loyal to the company, and she'd rescued one of the rebel leaders. At this point, the British started publishing information about how the Jezebel of Jhansi was the target, right? Like, she was someone who needed to be brought down. And they did call her that. They called her the Jezebel, which really, really tells you everything you need to know about what they thought of her as a person. Command of the Central India Field Force of about 4,500 men was given to a man named Hugh Rose, who set out to defeat her army and march on Jhansi later that year. So they approached from several different directions, but what they found when they got there was that the defenses were in wonderful condition. The granite walls were topped by a lot of guns and batteries. All surroundings cover around the fortress had been fully removed, and the inhabitants of the town, including her army, still consisting of over 10,000 people, to this man's, 3,000 to 4,000, had stockpiled literally tons of supplies in the case of a large siege.
What do you know? Giving her back all her power for temporarily really helped her in the end.
Yeah. So they stockaded themselves in, barricaded themselves, and set ready to wait for the British attack. But one of Rani's childhood friends showed up to rescue them. T.H.E. Now, T.H.E is also a pretty pivotal figure in these rebellion movements, but he came to take her side with an army of 20,000 men, adding on to her 11 to 15,000. So Rose, the British officer, with his 3,000 to 4,000 men, was now faced with a force that was literally 10 times as strong as his. And he knew that he literally could not compete. The only benefit that the British had over these large forces of T.H.E and Rani was their training. The British forces were simply better trained in most cases. Accurate British artillery fire managed to repel the first rebel line, but they managed to, while only losing about 100 men, kill about 1,500 people of this man's new army. In April of that year, Rani led a counterattack with a bunch of her troops, but they were driven back within the fort. So, despite this 10-to-1 odds, they weren't doing too hot. For all that she's parading around town with her battalion of female warriors, it's not helping that much. Like, they're holding this town, but they're not able to push out from it, if that makes sense. Rose's forces were essentially able to enter the fort, the town around the fort, controlling almost all of it at certain points. And eventually they settled in to get ready to assault the fort itself, where Rani and T.H.E were hiding. But they found out the next morning after settling in that she had escaped overnight. Don't you just love it when that happens? When the one person you're chasing just bye-bye. We don't actually know how she managed to escape, but once again, lots of different stories are told about this. She might have rode a horse. She might have jumped off the walls. Supposedly, she and her adopted son were lowered down the walls of the fort to a man waiting at the bottom with a horse, and they were able to ride off. Either way, what ended up happening was that she escaped with about 300 soldiers, and they rode over 100 miles in one night to Kalpi, and a strategic location on the Yamuna River, which was the headquarters of Rao Sahib, which was one of Lakshmibai's friend's nephews. At this point, a large force of soldiers had assembled there under Rani, Tatya Tope, and the Raja of Banpur at the time, over 10,000 strong, and they were looking to elect a leader. Rani thought that was going to be her. It was not. They elected Tatya Tope, who sources say she resented, and he resented for this decision, but they were childhood friends. So I kind of have a hard time believing that, especially because he came to save her when she was besieged, I have a hard time believing that there was actually genuine grief between the two of them in any capacity more than well, maybe it should have been me, but it's fine if it's you, you know? Rose's army did not stop advancing towards them. They headed towards Kalpi as soon as they learned that she had escaped. And this led to the final battle between them. Early in the morning, their forces met. And according to eyewitnesses, Rani charged the British forces at the front of the line with her companions and her troops, and died. We don't know how she died. We don't know who killed her. We don't even have actual proof that she did die in this assault. Stories say that she did. Eyewitnesses say that she did. But we don't know what happened to her body, and we don't know what happened to her. It's likely that if she died on the battlefield, she was cremated with all of her followers. And part of the reason why we probably don't know what happened to her body is because in a relatively actually intelligent move on the British part, you don't publicize something like that because that person becomes a martyr. Not that it stopped her from becoming essentially a martyr in the cause of Indian nationalism, but in general, inglorious deaths sort of complicate the narrative of making a person your culture hero. The British reactions to her death were not altogether polite. Some British officers expressed that they felt that she had died too easily and gotten off too lightly for her actions and such, but honestly, that's par for course with rebellions. After this fall at Gwalior, Tatya and Rao Sahib continued to lead the guerrilla resistance against the British, but both were eventually captured and hung, not being cited later than 1895. Her son was then stripped of the 600,000 rupees that were held in trust for him. He was given a monthly pension of 150 rupees, which he tried to argue in a court case later in his life to raise it to 250, and managed to somehow alienate himself to the Indian nationalists by saying that when he appealed to the British court, he was like, my mother was loyal but misunderstood, which then alienated the Indian support that he had at any point in his life.
Which is funny because it actually kind of proves to be somewhat true.
Well, yeah. She was not committed to war.
Yeah.
She was driven to war because of choices that people made around her. She did seek diplomatic solutions. She has been co-opted as a symbol of not even co-opted, she is a symbol of Indian nationalism and independence because of her participation in these rebellions. She's often shown on different currency, like stamps, postcards, that sort of thing. Often she's associated with leitmotifs of Hindu deities, not just Durga and Lakshmi, but Shiva, Hanuman, Chandi, and the mother goddess, as well as Shakti. So she kind of became a really important cultural figure in Indian history. For all that her contribution to Indian history really only lasted 10 years, if that, right? Like 10 years at the most, in which she was actively contributing to these events in Indian history. They were a pivotal 10 years, and she was well known and became very well received for what she did by the Indian people. As for the goddesses, right? I think what's important to note is just... So Lakshmi forms one part of a trio along with Parvati and Sarasvati, the Tri-Devi. We've actually talked about them before when we talked about Parvati.
I've got pages open from if you want to shift over to either of them at any point. It's up to you, though. Okay. I don't know how much you have on them.
That's fine. I wasn't going to cover a whole ton because I don't think it's that... What's important is that you know who Lakshmi is and what she's the goddess of. So she is one of the more important goddesses in Hindu mythology. Her aspects reign over fortune, prosperity, fertility, sovereignty, beauty, and abundance. And like I was saying, she forms one of the trinity of major goddesses called the Tri-Devi. Alakshmi is her sister. Her sister is opposite to her in basically every way. Her sister was born first. But where Lakshmi is always described as beautiful, she is described as ugly and such. She's the goddess of misfortune, essentially. And Alakshmi is interesting, more so than Lakshmi in my opinion, because Alakshmi by that name is not mentioned in the oldest Hindu texts. But what scholars believe is that she is an almost identical one-to-one representation of a deity who is mentioned called Niruti. And so Alakshmi is likely just a later name of the goddess Niruti. So she is Niruti, but she is also Alakshmi. And Lakshmi's, one of her major festivals is Diwali.
Alright, so what class are you thinking here?
See, here's the thing. I feel like there's not a really clear option here, you know? Like, this could be a lancer. This could be a rider. This could be a caster. This could be a ruler. This could be a whole lot of classes. And then you bring gods into it, right? This could be some sort of divine bullshit.
Someone say alter ego?
Exactly. Maybe a rider or a lancer.
Wrong on both accounts, actually. She is a saber servant.
Saber servant. Interesting. Okay. Okay. She looks like that one image of like when you put little girl Emiya. Do you know what I mean?
No.
Fuck.
Chloe?
Yeah, she uses the archer card.
Yeah.
Yeah, she kind of looks like that. Not exactly, but like, you know. I'm just saying. Oh. I like it. You can see the military inspiration. That is I'm fairly certain that's a traditional gun of the period, and also a traditional sword used by Indian royalty. Nice.
So yeah.
What have you got to tell me about Lakshmibai?
So this is Lakshmibai Saber. Just as a fun thing here to note, she's notably designed to reflect Jeanne d'Arc. Actually, her design's supposed to mirror Jeanne d'Arc.
Oh yeah, because
kind of take the headpiece.
Yeah,
and
okay.
The face is she's very much supposed to be a Jeanne face.
Because a lot of historians say that Rani is to India what Joan of Arc was to Central Europe and France.
Yeah.
She has the same level of cultural significance to the Indian people, right? And represents essentially the same thing. You know, a fight for freedom against the oppression of the British. I'm not wrong.
No, you're not.
Man, the British really be out here just like making enemies.
So while I had Sekhie look into Lakshmi, the real important note here is that she's actually also a pseudo-servant for Lakshmi.
Oh, okay.
It's not a huge influence, but she has a component of the goddess in her.
Mm-hmm.
The reason for her combination with Lakshmi is that the goddess granted her the power to help her save her sister Lakshmi from god Juna during the Lost World when he had all the gods in it.
Oh.
As far as Lakshmibai goes, she's a wise leader of a servant who looks to always try to find peace where possible, but is not afraid to pick up a sword and a musket and fight, or a gun.
I really admire her as a historical figure because I feel like very often when figures kind of become really renowned for leading rebellions and stuff, it's not necessarily that they were driven to sort of a point by repeated failures of diplomacy. It's usually that something progressed beyond the point of diplomacy being an option. Meanwhile, Lakshmibai did continue to attempt to solve her issues diplomatically for a very long time. Probably longer than was smart, given the fact that I think the more she appealed, the more she probably got on the wrong side of the British.
Mm-hmm.
But it was impressive of her to be able to kind of hold out for that. I've got relationships if you're...
Go right ahead. I have wander section, but that's actually going to be an abilities for once.
Okay, alright. I feel some mysterious affinity with that girl there. What, a French woman who fought against England? I see. Seems like we'd get along. I called that! Did you know that was gonna come up?
Yeah.
So you were over here laughing because I called it. Quit pursuing me while spouting such things as, oh yeah, you acquired a tan, Jean. Such a Jean is also healthily splendid, you know? You've got the wrong person. Yes. Certainly I've fought against the English. Be that as it may, I do not have a grudge against a people themselves. I won't kill them if we meet face to face, so be at ease. Okay. I hear that you have been officially assigned to a troop. I'm so happy for you. Let's fight together, comrade. That's for Nemo. Alright, Parvati, Kama, and Ganesha. Seems like there are also Indian gods here. If the goddess inside me had a bit more consciousness, I could have a talk with them. At the end of the day, I am different from them. Let's see. Ganesha. It is Ganesha, I think. Maybe. As a god, I respect her, but I think it would be better if she held a dignified appearance. Still, when I look at that lazy appearance of her, it's not like I don't feel peaceful, so perhaps that might be that god's role. I'm wrong? She's just being lazy? I see. So it's time for some compulsory room cleaning. Your wish is my command, Parvati-sama. I think Ganesha's about to get her shit rocked. Poor Janako. Poor Janako.
Some of the funniest ones with Janako are like when Parvati actually goes mother mode on her.
I mean, it's a mood. Okay, I'm at abilities.
So Lakshmibai wields a talwar sword and a rifle. She alternates between the two in combat at a moment's notice.
Mm-hmm.
The abilities Lakshmi grants her is actually, in some ways, kind of trouble. She's a conduit for misfortune, like standing on a wall of stone. That stone can crumble right beneath her feet.
Mm-hmm.
This is, at a glance, a problem. However, she can make use of it in creative ways. Namely, the best way to explain it's going to be to give you an example here of something that happened.
All right.
So the situation was that during the Indian Lost Belt, William Tell was sniping at the Chaldean party at a distance, preventing them from getting close to deal with him or even flee the area. Any move by the master would have resulted in the master likely taking a crossbow bolt to the head. So Lakshmibai has everyone get into a horse-drawn carriage, telling them to just ride while she deals with it.
Okay.
So she sits in the driver's seat of the carriage and simply just starts driving straight at William Tell.
Oh boy.
He of course just starts firing straight at the master and the horses too, to try dealing with them. But due to Lakshmibai's horrendous luck, Every single bolt hit her instead, and she just tanks it until the gap is closed between them, allowing the group to force William Tell to flee.
Oh, look, me in every D&D combat. Just run straight forward and hope that everyone hits me. I love that. Okay, so Charisma of the Rani. We talked about this before. Basically, that fits perfectly. Resistance of Gwalior, that's the last battle she fought. And then Assault on Sipahi. So that's after they leave, she hires her own private forces and then sort of holds the fort. But it makes sense. Like, good personal skills. Noble Phantasm is Nahi Dungi.
So this is what was originally a barrier noble phantasm that was meant to protect against invaders.
Mm-hmm.
However, Saber's just one of the classes she can be summoned to. I'm sure she can be summoned into other ones. But because she's a Saber, it allows her to be able to convert the energy of the barrier into a strike that she can use against the enemy.
It almost feels like Rongo Miniad.
A little bit.
In some ways, yeah. Because not necessarily Rongo Miniad specifically, but like Artoria, who's got like the walls of Camelot and shit, but also the Lance of God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Whereas
these are supposed to be like the walls of her city.
Exactly. A very well fortified city. We remember this. I appreciate that while they made her actual, like, character look like Jeanne, they didn't give up on giving her attributes that do directly kind of link to, like, the Sepoy troops and stuff like that.
Like, until I pointed it out, you wouldn't have immediately thought about Jeanne.
No. In fact, I actually thought about Chloe in the Archer outfit. Mm-hmm. Simply because there's just a similar color palette there. The third one I can see. Like, the third art, I get it, with Jeanne. We love a girl with a big sword. She's pretty new, isn't she?
Indian Lost Belt, so not the newest, but probably around year 4, maybe year 5.
I was going to say, because we didn't have another NP or anything, or we didn't have another,
No, like arcades or anything fancy.
Oh, look, little arrows in her head. Oh, no. I have a feeling that went wrong. That also went wrong. Hey, look, it's me trying to kick a soccer ball. Just missing entirely. I get it. I get it, girl. I get it. Me too. Oh, she's in here. Oh, yeah, there she is. I don't know everyone here yet.
Yeah, you're still missing at least one person.
Yeah, unfortunately. We've seen that art several times, though, so at some point...
At some point, you'll have collected them all.
At some point, I will catch them all. Ooh. Have fun with that one at the end. The end, but her will carries on, says the gates of her city. Her fight was over. Jhansi, her homeland, fell. Even the city of Kalpi, where she found refuge, had to be abandoned. Gwalior was her final destination, and that was where her story ended. What legacy did she leave for those who lived on? Was it the crumbled palace walls? Was it the dead bodies tragically stacked up? Or was it the dire reality that even a heroic queen could not conquer her merciless providence? None of these. The people saw something altogether different. It was still there. The people realized something altogether different. It should never be forgotten. It was a future that the queen anticipated and prepared for, and it was something that the people themselves needed to protect. And that's why her, or rather their, fight was not over. It was actually just beginning. And that is the story of the Indian fight for... the Sepoy Rebellion is the largest catalyst in the ongoing fight for Indian freedom from British control. And also the catalyst in the British exerting more and more control over India over the next 50 years. Because it's at this point that, Victoria is named Empress of India. Alright, the Queen's Dream. Yeah. Ooh, cherries. It's a little Ganesha, I think. Cute. Her dream is a long one. The velvety smooth cream and bittersweet chocolate. The moist dripping fruit accentuates its flavor with notes of sourness and a hint of color. Waiting for her distant awakening as her nap is still in its early stages. It's a Valentine's CE. Embodiment of good luck. So you're lucky just by being around her because she's unlucky. Love to put her in a room with me. Wouldn't that be funny? You know what I mean. A miraculous product made through sheer perseverance and only completed after a great many attempts. While it might be slightly misshapen, it's still edible. Actually, it's quite delicious. It proves that cooking skills really aren't as important as putting one's heart into it. As she harbors a goddess of misfortune, she no doubt has a particularly keen understanding of luck's role in the world. Yeah, I feel it. As someone who is uniquely unlucky. Alright, Holy Blue. Aha! Our first CE that is too new to have a translation. Without a group chasing around alone, surrounded by the fishes swimming leisurely, I feel a little dizzy in this ambiguous world. Wondering whether it is them or me on the other side of the glass. So I guess it's inevitable that I reach out to find the sleeve of my shirt to keep from falling over due to dizziness. It says it's linked to the Christmas event. I'm assuming that this is just... I'm just not getting the context behind this because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But...
Sorry, can I read that again? I might.
We love how Knick Knack pays attention when I'm talking.
Just pay back what you give. Yeah, no, this is Christmas 2023, yeah. Unfortunately. I thought it not being translated, maybe Christmas 2024 makes some sense.
No.
2023 story well enough.
Last time we saw this, I thought that was Altera. And I don't think you corrected me.
No, I don't.
Yep. Arrival of the Large Beast. Also, not translated. But that's because this is newer. This is Dancing Dragon Castle. Recently, we have been receiving rare goods and foreign people from across the sea. In the end, even mysterious things come. A huge body with long, sharp fangs that seems to cover the sky. What on earth is that? Envious eyes are cast upon the imposing figure. Yes, I'm not an import. It seems that's not the case. That's it. She doesn't have much more. I like that Fate, especially with her Bond CE, I like that Fate's really leaning into the idea that, like, while her story is a relatively tragic one, it's also the beginning of something greater, right? Like, she is sort of a rallying point, a starting point, like a symbol of hope for all intents and purposes, even if she had a tragic end, right? She's not remembered for the tragedy of her death, but for her contribution to freedom and national pride. I appreciate that. I think Fate can be sometimes, like, we've seen some servants where they're really good at channeling sort of like the pain in the stories that are being told. And we've seen some servants where they don't really seem to give a shit about, like, the context of the character itself. But this one actually feels really fitting.
Like, this is one of the ones that stuck a little closer to the book on it.
A good representation of what Lakshmibai actually represents, what Rani Jhansi represents. I like it. Picasso.
Well, gosh, coming up with the next, like, there's a part of me that wants to say something that could be horrendously terrible, so I'm going to avoid saying that.
There's a part of me that just wants to say we're parachuting into it, but I don't know if people would get that.
This time we said, fuck the British. So next time we're going to say, fuck the Americans, and also fuck Mexico.
Yeah! Like, comment, subscribe.